Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, a podcast all about growing your network and building your brand through traditional and digital networking techniques. I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. I've been strengthening brands through PR for over 35 years, and now I'm celebrating the success of executives, influencers, business owners, and entrepreneurs from all around the world, all of whom have cultivated their brands and broadened their networks through traditional and digital networking methods. Each week, I interview one of these interesting and influential individuals and provide an opportunity for you, the PR Maven Nation, to gain insights from their strategies and stories. So stay tuned for this week's episode, and thanks for listening. Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, episode number 219, presented by Marshall Communications, creator of the Marshall Plan 65-Step Strategic Process. For those of you new to the show, I'm your host, Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. Welcome. And I'm very excited about today's guest, Cherie Scott, who is founder and owner of Mumbai to Maine. Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast.
Thank you, Nancy. This seems like a dream because we've only met twice. And both times they've been really wonderful occasions. So it is such an honor. Thank you for having me.
It's really a testament to the power of social media. The fact that you and I feel like we're such close friends.
Yes.
But we really have only twice been in each other's physical presence.
Right. And this is the second time.
Yeah.
So, more power to social media and also how we choose to connect over it, right? And I think
exactly
some folks leverage it and some folks don't. And I think we're both natural network and connectors of relationships. So it was it was meant to be. Nancy.
Yes, it was meant to be.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm so glad that you're here. Yeah. So Mumbai native Cherie Scott left India at the age of 16 and moved to Vancouver, British Columbia. And I've been there, and that is a beautiful place also.
It is, yes. Absolutely.
But she's been anchored in Booth Bay, Maine now for over a decade. And in 2015, she launched her culinary blog, MumbaiToMaine.com, to share her signature recipes and nostalgic anecdotes of her youth in Mumbai. In the heart of the pandemic, Cherie launched her signature line of gourmet Indian simmer sauces inspired by her family's heritage recipes. Mumbai to Maine is Maine's first Indian-inspired and award-winning culinary brand, available nationwide on MumbaiToMaine.com and across specialty stores in Maine. And I definitely encourage you to try them out. I've tried all of her sauces out, and it's so much fun and so delicious. And
thank you. And nobody has ever made moose saag in the history of my brand, Nancy. So you take that accolade.
Well, it's funny. Well, I'm going to finish your intro and then we'll talk about the moose saag. Cherie was a guest chef instructor at Stonewall Kitchen Cooking School for 4 years and is now a guest chef instructor at Milk Street with Christopher Campbell Online Cooking School. And I've participated in one of those classes, and it was just a lot of fun. And she's the host of Talking Food in Maine, a series of intimate one-on-one conversations with notable culinary pioneers in Maine. And that's held at Lincoln Theater in Damascata, right?
Correct. Yeah. And I think we're in season 4 now. We actually lost season 2 to COVID, but we still count that season because those guests were just as important. And we invited some of them back when we went back in person.
Well, I actually have history at the Lincoln Theater because my family has a place on Damascata Lake.
That's right.
And I think that was where I had my first date when I was 15 years old.
No way.
At the Lincoln Theater.
Did you watch a movie there?
The Way We Were with Barbara Streisand.
What a great date movie. I'm assuming it was a lunch date. A matinee there at 15.
I don't remember what time of day it was. I remember the boy.
I'm sure you do. The movie. Not
All
so
right,
much.
we're getting a little off track here. To celebrate Maine's bicentennial and gastronomic talent, Cherie hosted and produces Mumbai to Maine's podcast,
in 2020, showcasing some of Maine's most accomplished culinary tastemakers. So Cherie, tell us about your career and how you got into it in the first place.
Absolutely. So thank you for that intro. I think I do a lot of hosting, but it's nice to be on this side and have a lovely conversation with you. So, do you want to know the real story of how my career started?
Okay. Yes, I always want the real story.
So the real story is that I made my first sales pitch at 9 years old. That's the story. It starts right there.
Not surprised.
And if I hadn't made that sales pitch at 9 years old, I would not be sitting here talking to you today.
That's amazing.
And hearing you
and
say
what
all
was
this.
that pitch at 9 years old?
The pitch was, Mom and Dad, this is how it's going to be. We need to move out of Mumbai and move to Toronto, where we can have a life that my cousins all have and enjoy. And as much as I loved what we had, I think as soon as we got on a plane and we went to Toronto to visit my cousins, I came back knowing that my life would never be the same again. That even though what my parents provided us and our humble, beginnings that we had in Mumbai was so fulfilling, and it was just a wonderful way to live. And I will never, ever give that up for anything, because that has made me who I am today. I still feel like, they had all the opportunity in the world and they didn't even think any of it. It was just part of their day in, day out. Meanwhile, I'm here in Mumbai seeing how much I didn't have because I was now exposed. And so I came back from that trip, and I remember being on that plane because my mom worked for Cathay Pacific. So we got free tickets. We flew all over the world on vacation. And I came back and I had already practiced what I was going to say to them. And it's a big deal at 9 to ask your parents, who are very well vested in their careers. And, my dad was almost retiring, to say, all right, let's pack it all up. And they did in 12 suitcases. My dad took voluntary retirement, cashed in every penny he had, and he was set for us. He was set. And he just cashed it all in and basically moved it to Vancouver, BC, because my mom said, we are not going anywhere where we have family, because I will not be obligated. So we're going to do this on our own. And she went all the way to the other side of the coast, which was Vancouver, BC, where we knew nobody, not even one family person, nobody. So we started cold. So if you want to talk about entrepreneurship, risk-taking, pathing out, and charting out a course, when you really have no idea what's on the other side, I think my parents were the risk takers. They were the way makers and sort of those barrier breakers from my legacy. And that's what's brought me here. And so I always say that's when my career started, because if I hadn't made that pitch and I hadn't convinced them that this is not good enough anymore, this is great, but there's much more on the other side, and we have to go figure out what that is. So that's how it all started.
I love that.
So even though I've done many other things in my life, to me, that was probably the most important mile marker in my story.
I love that. And it just shows how much your parents loved you and wanted the best for you.
And I had a sister too. So, what they wanted for us was just to have really all the opportunities to educate ourselves and to really forge our own paths, and my parents never ever guilted us about it. Like, oh, we're here now, we need you to go become doctors and engineers or lawyers. It was never like that. And that's one thing I really loved about my parents. I basically pitched them the next time and I said, by the way, I'm going to New York City and I'm going to go study musical theater. And I got a Michael J. Fox scholarship, and I'll see you in New York City. And 2 days after high school, I got on a plane and I moved to Manhattan, and I pretty much never came back. So I feel like, I think I've been a bit of a rebel, but I've also been one of those kids, I think, where my parents are just like, we don't know what to do with her. She is going to do what she wants to do. So let's just get out of the way and just let her go live her life, and we will support her. And they indeed did. So
I'm laughing because my parents would often say, we're not really sure where you came from, because I was so different than both of them. I mean, they were fairly extroverted, but I am about as extroverted as a person can be. And they just didn't know how I got all of my gumption. And I think probably you share gumption as well.
I guess that's the word. Gumption,
the gumption sisters.
Yes, the gumption sisters. And I think that, I always say if my mother were alive today, she would just probably be shaking her head and going, oh my gosh, if I only knew this is where it was all going to end up. Her starting a food brand where I wanted nothing to do with being in her kitchen because I got shooed away. Every time I walked into that tiny little kitchen in Mumbai, literally the size of a closet, it's hot. My mom's trying to work and I'm too busy eating all the prep and I'm in her way. And she's just trying to put a meal on the table. She's a full-time working mom. So I think the fact that I'm even in the kitchen now as much as I am and that I handcraft these summer sauces truly feels like a dream that I never thought would ever happen. So that's how I kind of know that it was my destiny. Like it was not something that I chose. It chose me.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And the other thing that I remember hearing you say was when you were in New York, you didn't have a lot of money. No. And you used to go.
But I had gumption, Nancy.
Yes.
I didn't have money, but I had gumption.
And didn't you used to go and get 2 meatballs every day?
It was 3, actually. I negotiated with the Italian guy in the building. I went down on the first day I got to New York City. My dad handed me $750 US, like literally $100 bill at a time. And then the last 15 singles. And he said, this is all I have. You have to make do with it. And I'm going off to Manhattan, and I was very young. And I said, no problem. And I was so naive. That would probably have lasted me a month. But I said, yeah, no problem. I won't need more than that. And so I got there on the first day. I figured out I would have to portion this money out. And so I went to the Italian guy, the little bistro in the building. And I said to the guy, listen, is there any way you can feed me for $3 a day? And he said, what do you want? I said, just some meatballs and some sauce and maybe some garlic knots. And every day he'd have them ready for me in the little foil containers. And he'd put 3 garlic knots and meatballs in there for me with extra sauce. And believe it or not, I lived on that. I did, but I made it work.
That's amazing. Well, it was probably the highlight of his day too, when you came in.
This little Indian girl coming in, telling him what to do. Yes. He probably felt so sorry for me, but but it was good. Those are the things that sort of, teach you how to just really have like that entrepreneurial savvy, to negotiate, to ask for what you want, to settle for nothing less but what you want, because you need to survive.
That's right.
You need to make it through. And so there's no negotiables that you have to eat, so you figure out what you're going to do to get through it. So I'm glad I had those early life lessons.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and your parents gave you the confidence that you could speak up for yourself as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think making sure we had a voice that was heard, all very important. And I think we'll come back to that in my story in Maine and why that was important when I got here. But,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, you're obviously very gifted in public relations, and this is the PR Maven Podcast. So it's about public relations. Mm-hmm. And you're doing all the marketing for Mumbai to Maine. And what is your favorite aspect of marketing?
Thank you for that. I don't even think of it really as marketing. I think of it more as storytelling. And I know that term also gets overused a lot these days, but truly, I only know my story, Nancy. I don't know anyone else's story. I'm not trying to be like anyone else. In fact, I'm trying to create a category that's probably never been done before in Indian food, where it's high luxury, premium gourmet Indian food that's accessible to you in your pantry. And even though there are other wonderful Indian sauces on the market, I think I'm trying to create a lifestyle brand around it. And so for me, the way I market myself is really by telling my story only the way I know it. And I think because I've done that in a very organic and authentic way, I think people have connected with it. And I was also talking to someone the other day about this that I think the reason why people connect with my story is because everyone's like, I've always wanted to do that. I've always wanted to put something in a jar. I've always wanted to make sauces or jams or jellies or have some sort of an entrepreneurial dream. And so here's somebody that's actually done it and did it without having any chef experience, done it without any marketing dollars, just literally took my story, my journey, and I put it in that jar. I said, this jar will tell you everything you need to know about me. flip it to the back. You'll know how to use it, and you'll know where the sauce came from and my story. Go to my blog. It'll just open up my whole life to you through recipes, through stories, through events where you can come and be a part of it. And then most importantly, I want to earn that space in your pantry. That's non-negotiable. Like, that's Mumbai to Maine, and we will always keep ordering it. So, I think that's been sort of how I've approached it. It hasn't been very strategic. It's been more organic. And I think it's been fun that way because I really haven't crafted out a playbook of sorts. I just let this journey really take me on a ride and leveraged every opportunity and every connection I made along the way to either lift others up with me or thanking them for lifting me up with them. Either way.
Right.
And it's been pretty successful so far. And there's so many examples of that. We'll talk about a few of them today. But.
Well, when I think about the book that I wrote during the pandemic, Grow Your Audience, Grow Your Brand.
Yes.
I mean, you have done just that. You have a large audience of people who love your story,
Mm-hmm.
and that has helped grow your personal brand as well as the brand of your sauces.
Yes, I think you're right. I think, Nancy, I always say this. I built the community first, and then I built the product. And as soon as I did that, it was like the community just couldn't get enough of it. I find oftentimes what I see is a product coming to market, and then you're trying to build a community around it, or you're trying to build engagement around the product. But for me, it was all about the person, the people who I wanted to connect with, and then the product. And I think putting that in that order, I think ended up being a very successful equation for me. Because once I put the product on the market, it was like, oh my gosh, she's finally been telling us about all this stuff. And now she's actually put it in a jar. So let's go see what this is all about. And sort of hopping on that ride with me, which was really exciting.
Well, as you're saying this, I'm thinking of other women who have powerful brands and stories, like Martha Stewart, Rachel Ray, Ina Garten,
Yes.
even here in Maine, Erin French of The
Yes.
Lost Kitchen. And I would put you right in the same category. All
Wow.
of those women have a strong presence, big personality,
Yeah.
and a
Yeah.
great story. And then they infuse that story into their food, as you have.
I think, to me, that's the most, thank you, first of all, I'm very humbled by that. But I think, when you think about Martha's story, and, she had a late start to her career. She started in her 40s too. And she was in catering for years before she did anything else. And I think she created that community and that reputation and that brand awareness for her excellence in how she executed one event after another. And then by the time she put together, her lifestyle brand, it was like everyone was all in. Martha, please show us how to do a good thing.
Right.
It's a good thing. I still remember that. So
well, and I also think of Amber Lamke, and we just
Yes.
talked about Amber, who is the founder of Maine Grains in Skowhegan, Maine.
love
And
her.
you were saying that you were listening to my episode that I did with her. And
Yes.
Martha eats Maine Grains oatmeal every single day for breakfast.
I know she does.
So she's a big brand ambassador for Maine Grains.
Yeah, more power to Martha. And yeah, absolutely. When I think of one of Maine's most formidable tastemakers and community builders, it is Amber Lamke. And I know she won the award this year for, I think, of the year. She was one of the best of the year. But I loved that podcast, and I was actually listening to it while I was cutting onions. Hundreds of pounds of onions that I cut for my sauces. But it was amazing to listen to Amber. And as you know, Amber and I have actually had a wonderful chat on Talking Food in Maine. And she really walked me through the genesis of how all that came to be. And, the story of Maine Grains and how it's, it's way more than grains, right? It's about community building. It's about a resurgence. It's about a resurgence in how we eat, a renaissance in our lifestyle, and how we connect to where our food comes from at the most base level. So yeah, Amber she is my role model.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm sure she would be flattered.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
So when it comes to Mumbai to Maine, you've done a great job of integrating in-person events, social media, public relations, and advertising. How do you prioritize? Where do you spend your time and your money?
That's a great question. And as a startup entrepreneur, I will tell you this, time is of the essence. So I look at things that, first of all, I have to be able to just dive into something 150% without thinking about what am I getting out of it? Is this going to pay me? Is this going to make me money for the brand? Is it going to help me invest? None of that matters. For me, it's all very strategic. And I never take any of that into account when I think about who I'm collaborating with. It's really about the brand, the person behind the brand, the story they're trying to tell, and does it align with mine? That's very important. If I can strengthen their brand and they can strengthen mine, then that's a collab that's really exciting to me. So, for example, Luke's Lobster, right? So Ben Conniff, who's the co-founder, reached out to me in an email randomly, I don't know, a few weeks ago and said, hey, Cherie, chef here at Portland Pier flagship headquarter restaurant wants to put mussels on the menu. And the first person I thought about was you. I really thought this was a perfect way to incorporate the Caldine, which is my Goan coconut curry simmer sauce, right into our mussels here at Luke's with this beautiful Mumbai to Maine collab. And again, I didn't think about anything else, but yes, I'm so on board, because to me, that's magic. When something happens that organically, but also in a very collaborative and inclusive way, where Luke's Lobster is lifting my brand and putting it on their menu and showcasing it. And I think so highly of them. They are the #1 top rated certified B Corp restaurant in the country. One of the top ranked. And I have a great relationship with Ben. We met 10 years ago when I was planning events for the Chamber of Commerce in Boothbay Harbor for Clawdown. It's the big lobster bite competition. And I reached out to him saying, hey, Ben, do you want to be one of my judges for the contest? And that's how we met 10 years ago. And it just goes to show, dots never connect forward. Like Steve Jobs says, they always connect backward. So when you look at this collaboration and where it really started, it was 10 years ago when I built my first relationship with Ben. When he was just launching Luke's, they were probably in the nascent stages of Luke's kind of hitting the scene. And so, I always say for me, the most exciting part is to just really look at the relationships that I'm working with on that collaboration and the time it will take, but what will I get out of it in terms of really telling my story in a different way, or maybe infusing it into something in Maine where I can, collaborate with someone else, because my entire brand is Mumbai to Maine. So I'm always looking for that fun sort of play on it, So Amber and I are actually going to be doing something soon up at the mill. So we're going to be taking my SOG and putting it on their delicious pizzas at Miller's Table.
Oh, awesome.
And doing an Indian SOG pizza
with her sisters.
Sisters Good Crust Pizza and Crooked Creamery's ricotta.
Amy Robot.
And then local lamb from a farmer. And so we're going to put together this bounty, this feast of all these beautiful brands, all women, by the way,
I can't
coming
wait.
together to celebrate, the way Maine style pizza should be made.
I hope you're going to have a party.
Oh, we will have a pizza party. Yes. But you see how exciting that is to me? Yes, it's going to take time. I have to drive up and, we're going to do this, but it's going to be a core memory in my brand, right? I'll think about it years from now and I'll think about how meaningful that was for me.
Right.
And so, maybe I'm not too strategic in terms of, cutting deals and things like that, but that's okay. That'll all come. For me right now, I'm just building community, and it's effortless and fun when it's done right. With the right people.
And having a community of raving fans is one of the pillars of a strong brand, really.
Sure. And when you think about it, they have a legion of followers. Luke's Lobster, Maine Grains, these folks have built stellar brands in Maine for years now. And so when they choose to partner with me, guess what it does for me?
That's right.
So that's how I sort of think of these relationships as sort of these wonderful building blocks of what it means to be a Maine tastemaker at the highest level.
All ships will rise with the tide.
Yes, indeed. And that's Maine's ethos, right?
That's
right. Entrepreneurial ethos. So.
That's right.
Yeah.
So PR and social media have been very effective for building the Mumbai to Maine brand. Mm-hmm. Can you give us some examples of the most impactful tactics you have implemented?
Yeah. So I think, number one, I think I really make sure I put myself out there sort of as a subject expert with Indian food. I think it's very important to do that. And so for the 4 years that I guest chefed at Stonewall Kitchen, those rides back and forth to Stonewall, 2.5 hours at midnight after I'd worked an entire day, fed kids, put them to bed, got in the car, drove until midnight, woke up at 6, cooked for 36 people, then taught, then drove back home. You know, when I think about those nights and when I was making those drives in the middle of snowstorms, whatever it was, those were some of the best days of my brand, because a lot of people do not know this. But when I taught every one of those classes that I had curated, these menus, and they were always sold out, people just wanted Indian food, like real authentic Indian food. I realized that I was, in a way, doing a customer discovery in real time with an audience that I knew related to my brand and my story anyway, which is why they were all coming. So I used those classes as focus groups. Nobody really knew what was coming. You know, they didn't know I was coming out with a sauce line or anything like that. But I just wanted to test the waters and see if I pushed the envelope here, what would happen? And the class was full. I'd create these menus that I thought, there's no way anyone's going to sign up for this. I mean, no way. These are way too authentic. Probably never seen on an Indian restaurant menu ever. And that's the reason why they came. Because like, oh, this is what real Indian food is like. Okay, we're going to go. And so my classes were full for 4 years. And I thought, wow, this is a great sign. So there is an audience for this brand. There is an audience for real, authentic, regional Indian food. You know, when you think about Italian sauce and then you think about Sicilian Italian sauce, you know, and all the different kinds of Italian sauce, the same goes with Indian food. I mean, there's not just one curry in India, right? There's a Goan iconic coconut simmer sauce, Kaldeen. There's a Kerala coconut curry. There's a North Indian butter chicken kind of a makhani sauce. I mean, everything is very specific and regional. So for me, it was important to first kind of cover that ground and say, okay, I'm an immigrant. Yes, I have credibility. I've lived in India. I am Indian. It's in my DNA. But do you know anything about Indian food? I really don't. So what I did was I took that opportunity at Stonewall Kitchen every time I created a menu to really understand and master those dishes so that when I was teaching them, I could connect with them and say, listen, did you know that until the age of like 32 or 34, I didn't even know how to make a single Indian dish?
Huh.
And they're sitting there going, seriously? And she's teaching this class? I'm like, yeah, if I can do it, you can do it. And by the way, I'm coming out with a gourmet simmer sauce line. So all of a sudden, this ability for them to connect with me, like, okay, so she's not some highfalutin chef. She's like a home style cook. We can totally do this in our kitchen. And they would. And then 2 hours later, I would get texts and photos of what they've done in their kitchens, which was great because then I knew that I was creating a place where I could speak with authority about Indian food. And so this is why I'm saying 4 years later, when the sauces came out, it was very easy because everyone was like, oh yeah, she's taught at Stonewall. Oh, she knows Indian food. And it just became sort of a red carpet for me to roll it out on Facebook, which is exactly what I did.
Yeah.
And like, I think it was like 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I just very sneakily posted a picture of the sauces and I said, okay, this is happening. And a line of them all sitting flipped over or whatever. And people went mad for it. And I don't know if it was because it was in the middle of the pandemic or not, but I had people from New Zealand inboxing me on Facebook, messaging me saying, oh my gosh, could you please bring this to New Zealand? Because this is exactly what we miss about our Indian food. But also just in general, I think it was just exciting to see a brand kind of come out of nowhere in the middle of a pandemic that was, you know, exactly what folks needed.
And people were cooking at home, right? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Well, we're going to hear more about your story, but first I want to remind you how to get a Things to Do Today pad from the PR Maven Podcast. And you might just be getting one, and I know you'll be writing all your things to do because you probably have a lot to do. So if you leave a review and subscribe to the PR Maven Podcast on your favorite podcast player and visit prmaven.com/giveaway, submit your information. We're going to send you a pad in the mail, the old-fashioned mail. And
I love it.
I'm a big fan of the old-fashioned mail. So we're going to hear from Mike Duguay now, and then we'll be back with more from Cherie Scott.
Thank you.
After reading PR Works, I really started to think about how marketing actually works. And I know that sounds a little bit ridiculous, but what I realize is what each platform nowadays that we use out there in digital media and social media has its own nuance and also quirks to it. And understanding how they're used is exceedingly important. Because when you have a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail. And you can't approach it that way in marketing. And that's where I think Nancy's brilliance really shined in PR works. I think grow your audience, grow your brand is really sort of the manifesto of understanding that there's many different levels to marketing. It's on your personal side of your brand, how actually you express yourself through business, but also what people hear you saying and what they see out there in the public eye as well. So I think what's really important there, that's really the blueprint of how you go about using these new social media platforms, but also to express who you are as a human being. Because people want to see you authentically and genuinely working with not only what you do, but also with the customers. And Nancy, on a personal level, I think that's who she is. She embodies that approach.
Welcome back to the PR Maven Podcast. And it's so funny because Cherie Scott and I are here, like, we're having so much fun having this conversation. So I was like, oh, we're doing a podcast? I forgot about that.
I feel like, where's the wine, Nancy? It's almost 12 o'clock.
I know. 12 o'clock, maybe it's 12 o'clock in India.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere and 12 o'clock here. So we're going to have a drink.
So we're also streaming live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, which is great. So I hope that you're enjoying us from one of those platforms. So Cherie, as you look ahead, where do you see Mumbai to Maine going in the next 5 years?
Oh my gosh, that is such a great question. And I'm a big vision person. I feel like it's really important to have a vision for this brand where, as I mentioned, this entire brand is like a love letter to my mother. But in 5 years, I want to be able to turn things around with my brand and actually go back to Mumbai. So it's Mumbai to Maine, right? But I want to go back to Mumbai. It'll be almost 30 some years since I've been back, and see it through fresh eyes. Definitely a lot of nostalgia, and really reconnect with my roots geographically, like taking my daughter, who is going to be graduating from high school in a couple of years, on her way to start her life, and getting on a plane with her and saying, let's go, Sophia, let's go see where mom grew up. Like, really see where mom grew up. Not just, hey, she's from Mumbai, like the actual street. This is the church I went to, like everything about my life. And then hitting the shores of Goa, right? Which is where my ancestors came from. And understanding what it smells like when that first monsoon rain hits Goa, and you're having your coconuts just fall off the trees, and you're grating them instead of just opening up a can of coconut milk, and everything the way my mother did, and just kind of time stamping, what they did, how they did it, and putting together this most beautiful cookbook, which is really going to be a cookbook / memoir, to kind of capture the essence of what Goa is. A lot of people talk about Mumbai, a lot of people talk about India, but Goa is a gem. And there's a reason why, even before the British came in, the Portuguese came in and took everything they could from Goa and took it back to Portugal, right? And then they brought with them specific things like potatoes and things like that. The chili came through the Portuguese to Goa. But things like that, just really looking at it in a historical culinary narrative, and understanding how the locals make these beautiful chorizos and why the pig is revered there, because they didn't have fridges. They had vinegar and sugar and coconut, and they would take that pig and they would cure it and they would case it, and they'd make these delicious dishes from all the chorizo, and just trying to really put together this sort of culinary traditional Goa sort of stamp on my childhood, that then I want to publish and present to my daughter as a love letter. When she graduates college, I want to give that to her and let her just kind of know then when she reads it that we went on that journey together.
Yeah. And she's a beautiful girl.
Yeah. And so, and she wants to be a filmmaker at some point, and she's a musician. So I anticipate us doing a lot of filming and documenting, on the whole thing, and just really getting a full, like a sort of a media piece around it, the TV, the podcast, the whole docuseries of us doing that whole journey together, and then archiving it in that book, which I think will just be beautiful. So that'll be a really
great
way.
vision.
Yeah.
I love that.
And as far as like where the brand is, yes, on your pantry shelves, non-negotiable. Yes.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And I know you've been in many business pitch competitions.
Yes.
And how have you used those to boost your brand?
I think pitch competitions are a fantastic way to get brand awareness. They also really sharpen your pitching skills, right? Because you never know when you're going to have that 1 minute. Sometimes it's 30 seconds. And so it's a great way to take everything you think about your brand and just kind of elevator pitch it and just cut all the fat out. What do you do? Why do you do it? How does it solve a problem? And where do you want to go? And present it and know that these pitch competitions in the state of Maine are so competitive, but they're so supportive. I find like when we come to these competitions, like for example, Heather and I were in Greenlight, Maine together. We actually had to go head to head for
Heather
Good Crust.
Kearns from Greenlight, Maine.
Yeah, Heather Kearns
me,
from Good Crust.
From Good Crust on Greenlight, Maine. Sorry.
Yeah, and I was doing Mumbai to Maine. Of course, she's been in business way longer than I have, but it was so great. We went head to head with each other, and when we were done, we were both texting each other love notes like, you're amazing, or like so excited, hope you win this kind of thing. And I think that's the ethos in Maine is that, yes, we all want to win, but we're about building winning businesses together because we all know that Maine is almost all small business.
Right.
So we're really here to kind of, nudge each other along. And I think from the Greenlight Maine, Elevating Voices, which did so much for me, as you know, they gave me that grant when I first started the business. And then, of course, Top Gun, which was the program that I first went into when I first started with Tom Rainey and Lori Johnson, Terry Johnson. And my mentor, I have to tell you, it's really important to have some very strategic mentors because as we all know, we can't do everything well. Nancy Strogeny from SCORE has just been one of the biggest gifts I've had in my career from Top Gun. She was presented to me as my mentor, and she will be the mentor for my business for the rest of my life. So.
Yeah, she's an incredible resource for us in Maine. I know Nancy enough to know that I'm glad I have the same name as her. But she's with SCORE, which is the Service Corps of Retired Executives. Yes. And I think she is a wonderful resource for all of Maine entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and she's just fantastic. And I think the thing I love about Nancy with mentorship, it's important that they're close when you need them to be close, and they know where to step back and give you the space to make your own decisions. Right. And that's what I love about Nancy. When I'm needy of her, she's right there for me. And when I need her to step away, she's never sort of the helicopter sort of mentor, which I really like because it gives me the space to feel like I am making my own decisions and I'm empowered to do so. So, So mentors are very important in Maine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And what is a book, an app, or a podcast that you have found helpful in your business and your personal life, and why?
Yeah. So, I think the one podcast that I can really relate to is How I Built This with Guy Raz.
I love that too.
And I have to tell you, I have had many moments when I've said, okay, do I really want to forge forward with this? Because listening to the entrepreneurial journeys that he really gets through the tough times. It's never about, hey, tell me how you went from $0 to $1 billion in 5 years, Chobani. It's never about that. It's about, tell me about everything you've never told anybody else, which is Chobani almost went bankrupt while getting there. That's something he's never told anybody, but that's the story you're going to get on How I Built This. And those are the stories that to me as an entrepreneur are invaluable. It's not about how do you make all the money. It's about how you handle the journey getting to that successful moment of saying, okay, I think I made it. And maybe I still haven't because I'm going to lose it all. I think it keeps it real. And I really enjoy that. A book that I've loved, believe it or not, I was 13 years old and I was standing in a bookstore looking at some books, and this book popped out at me, and it was The Game of Life and How to Play It. And it's by Florence Scovel Shinn. And it's a very thin book. And I don't know what I was going through in my life as a teenager at 13, but I remember not even being able to put the book down nor find a seat. I read that entire book at 13, standing up
In the bookstore?
In the bookstore.
That's
right in front of
amazing.
it. I started reading it. I just couldn't stop reading until the end of it. And I put it back up. I didn't have any money to buy it. I was 13. I put it back up.
And was this in Mumbai?
In Mumbai. And it transformed my life because it was about really just the power of your words, but more importantly, the power of your vision and how your vision will basically dictate your life, right? So if you're envisioning success, no matter what you go through to get there, if you're always looking at that and manifesting that, it will come to pass, right? Because you put so much energy behind it that you're always on that path to success, no matter what the trials are. But at 13, for me, I think I had already had this idea, we're getting out of here. We're leaving. So I was always a big picture thinker, even when I was very young. And I think that has been sometimes not a very good thing because I do want to do a lot all at once. And so I need to learn how to do one chunk of the elephant at a time and just focus on each building block. But I think that happens with a lot of visionary people who just like big picture,
Oh, yeah.
a lot of creative, energy that goes behind it. But that's a great book. So I highly recommend it. And by the way, you will be getting one of those in the mail because that's the one I gift, I literally gifted to everybody. That's really important to me in my life. You'll get a
Have you looked Florence up? Is she still alive?
Oh, no, she's
gone.
been gone for
God bless
years.
her.
Yeah, but it's a great book.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Cherie, how can people get in touch with you and more importantly, where can they buy Mumbai to Maine sauces?
Yeah, so this is exciting because I am at a crossroads with Mumbai to Maine. So you can definitely find Mumbai to Maine sauces right on my website, mumbaidomaine.com. I ship nationwide. In fact, I ship all the way to Maui. So I think Alaska is probably the only place I have not shipped out yet, but I think everywhere else. You can also find it at some wonderful local specialty stores here in Maine. And I am pretty soon moving into, a co-packing situation where I'm scaling the business. And so I'll be going sort of regionally distribution in stores. So it'll be all specialty stores in, the Northeast. And then I'll be pretty much doing one chunk of that elephant at a time. So
Yeah, good for
we know
you.
how it is. You got to scale and you got to do it really mindfully and strategically so that
Yes.
you don't build too fast. And I know that it's been 2 years. I just completed my second anniversary a couple of weeks ago. And everyone's like, okay, why aren't you everywhere? I said, because once the Titanic leaves, it's very hard to turn it around. You have to have everything in place and you really have to build out the steps so that when you scale, you're positioned to be able to sustain that scale. So going from a kitchen with a pot like this to a huge kettle that's producing 1,000 jars at a time versus 36.
Yeah.
You really have to put a lot of thought and you have to test it. And, my one promise I had made when I launched this brand was that I was never going to put it in a jar unless it tasted like my mother had just made it and put it in a jar and put it in the fridge when I opened it. That was the one promise I made myself. So abiding by that, I'm holding my co-packers to that same level of excellence, and they've done very well so far.
That's
so
awesome.
lots of fun things to come in 23.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah.
And just one last thing, you brought it up at the very beginning. I had gotten a gift of moose meat from my physical therapist, Dr. Phil Finnemore.
Yes.
He's a hunter,
Mhm.
and he had gone moose hunting, and he brought me some moose meat, and I made it with your sog, and it was just amazing.
That is the most definitive Mumbai to Maine collaboration I've ever seen. I didn't even ask for it. I just saw it in my stories on Instagram and I said, what is that? It's moose meat sog and it's by Nancy Marshall. And I was like, trust Nancy to take it to the next level, right? Because it cannot get more creative than that.
Yeah.
But I love
That's
that.
a main thing, right?
Yeah. You got to make that for me. I want to try that sometime.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, we have a lot of plans
We
for the
do.
future. We have a
Yes.
lot to do. So it's a good thing.
It is.
So Cherie, this has been just so special and wonderful. I'm so glad we were able to make this happen.
Thank you, Nancy. It's such a pleasure. And I love your podcast. I follow it. I listen to it at all hours of the day and night. But
Thank you.
it's always been able to teach me something about my brand. And seeing you actually live it is always fun.
Well,
I love your notes.
Ah!
All your handwritten notes and
Oh, great.
recipes.
Yeah. Well, I do love
You do.
I love doing that. So, well, thank you for joining us, everybody in PR Maven Nation. And this has been another great episode, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great day, PR Maven Nation.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the PR Maven Podcast. I invite you to share a review of the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also join the PR Maven Nation on Facebook. It's free to join, and it's a great community of like-minded individuals who are all looking to learn and grow from one another. If you use an Alexa device, use your Alexa app to search the skills and games section to find and enable the PR Maven Podcast Flash Briefing. This will give you access to exclusive content and more PR and marketing advice. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your week, PR Maven Nation.